Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
And my name is Matt.
And today is our conclusion episode of our time travel series. It's a momentous occasion. We are doing our awards ceremony, as has become tradition on the podcast. We've got a lot of films to look at, a lot of awards to dish out. It's going to be a good one, isn't it, Matt?
Yes, and if you're listening to this, it should now be 2021. Congratulations to you, the listener. You made it through 2020. I'm so happy for you. We're recording this still in the bad times, but we're looking forward to joining you the other side of this year.
So we've been on quite an adventure with this series, haven't we, Matt? I think it's been our longest running series so far, hasn't it? How many episodes are we on? We're on this is the 21st episode, I think.
Yeah, we've been packing in a lot of time travel movies. We've covered a huge range. We've seen a lot of time machines. We've seen a lot of mad scientists. We've been to all kinds of periods of history in the future. It's been a hell of a journey. But here we are, looking back on our favourites.
Yeah, it's been a really good one, this series. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, the other series have been great, but I think we've had a lot of fun with this one. There's so much ground we've covered in the sort of 21 episode span. And like I said, all the films are so different as well. So it's going to be interesting dishing out these awards and finding out how they rank.
Yeah, and I think it's been our most mind-bending series so far. We dealt with some pretty heady concepts when we were looking at AI and space, but there's something about time travel that's so, otherworldly and such an alien concept and so hard to get your head around that it's been more mind-bending, I think, for me anyway, than the last two series.
I'm glad you've been here to help me work out some of these weird time paradoxes and stuff, because like I've said before on the podcast, they have messed with my mind so much this series. It's been good to be able to chat them through and try and put the puzzle pieces together and figure out what the hell is going on in some of these films.
Yeah, it's been fun dissecting some of the time travel that's been happening and trying to make sense of it. Yeah, like you said, sometimes it doesn't always make sense, but that's okay in time travel. It doesn't always have to work. It just has to happen.
Exactly. And you just let yourself go along on the ride, go to all these different places, wibbly wobbly time travel stuff. And it's been good. So shall we start dishing out those awards then, Matt?
Yeah, what's our first category, James?
So our first category is coolest time machine. So the nominees are the DeLorean, the famous DeLorean, of course, from Back to the Future, the phone box from Bill and Ted, H.G. Wells' famous time machine, which everybody knows and loves, and we've also thrown in the Time Cop time machine as well as one of the coolest time machines.
Yeah, we had to put in the Time Cop one. They've got those Battlestar Galactica Viper jets on a train track monorail going into the Stargate through a weird gap and then vanishing, and then they jump through like a flexi portal through space. Pretty cool stuff. Can't deny it. But the other ones, slightly more famous, I would say. Yeah,
I reckon so. I think people will know the other ones instantly, whereas the Time Cop one, yeah, maybe it's just us who knows and likes that one. But we'll see. We've also had to give an honourable mention to the hot tub from the Hot Tub Time Machine. Of course, because the Hot Tub Time Machine would be nothing without the hot tub.
The titular Hot Tub Time Machine.
Exactly. So we had to give an honourable mention to that one. But let's start off with the DeLorean then. So let's figure out if this one should win or not. What about the DeLorean, Matt?
Well, it's going to be hard for the other entrants in this category to make a case for them to win, I think. We've obviously got, I think this is the bookies' favourite, the DeLorean, the iconic crappy car turned into a time machine by the Doc. Gull-wing doors, the things on the back, I don't know what they are. They look like jet engines, but they're not. Love all of that stuff. And if you're lucky, there might be a big dog in it, which is always nice.
Yeah, always good. And I remember when we did that episode on Back to the Future, the first one we did in the series, it was interesting finding out about how the DeLorean itself was a car manufacturer which was almost out of business, and then it was kind of resurrected through this film. I had no real idea about that, and I think that kind of adds to the legend of that in the film.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes it so much more iconic because it would have been so weird and out of place to see that as the time machine, and it allows it to, like you said, it's like rejuvenates it, it gives it new life, and it just becomes its own thing. And it's now, I mean, no one thinks about DeLoreans other than time machines, do they?
Yeah, and they're always thinking about flying cars when they look at DeLoreans now.
What a legacy. Okay, well, what about the phone box in Bill and Ted? Because when we started this series, I think I did make a point of saying that I preferred Bill and Ted to Back to the Future. And I still, I do love that phone box.
I think the only thing with the phone box is it's pretty much it's very similar to the police box in Doctor Who as well, isn't it?
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but that is one of the time machines we haven't got in here. But of course, because we mainly look at films on the podcast, I feel like the police box and Doctor Who would have been too much to throw into this category.
Yeah, sorry, Doctor Who fans, didn't make the cut. The phone box in Bill and Ted, I just think it's so cool because I remember like when I was a kid watching it, and in kind of the same way that the DeLorean just looks like a time machine, there's something about an American phone box with the aerial that pops out that looks like a broken umbrella, and the door that kind of like concertinas instead of just opening. Like it didn't look like anything I was familiar with when I was a kid. So to me, it was just the time travel phone box from Bill and Ted. It almost had that same like iconography or unique iconography as the DeLorean did in Back to the Future.
Yeah, and you always think about that, the cover of the Bill and Ted sort of DVDs and stuff, where you see them all sort of squashed against the door of that phone box, and that kind of adds to it as well. The fact is just like, it is just a tiny phone box, and then they squeeze all of these famous historical figures in there. It's got all of that to it, and it is like, it's fun, the phone box, and it's a simple idea. They dial in the time that they want to go to. I mean, similar to the DeLorean, but with this one, it's like they've got a big sort of yellow pages where they can figure out where to go. All of that stuff. I really loved that about the phone box in Bill and Ted.
Nice and simple, yeah. Okay, well, what about a less simple one then? H.G. Wells's time machine, the big sled?
Yeah, the big sort of sled. I'm a big fan of this one, I would say. Like we said, I think we said this when we did the episode on it. It's a shame it's not on wheels, because then it would kind of like be on par with the DeLorean for me a little bit.
You mean in terms of usefulness as a time machine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because like there's a big thing in the film where he's having to drag the time machine to the right place. So it's like, it's got all of that to it. But in terms of look, it's a pretty cool time machine, right?
Yeah, if you want to talk about unique iconography, they really push the boat out with that. Although we talked about the fact that it is supposed to look like a child's sled, isn't it? But that's maybe not something that's familiar to modern eyes. And it just sort of looks like its own crazy thing. It is like half sled, half hovercraft. But it's unique in its own design.
So it's like looking about how these time machines have aged as well, I suppose. So in those three that we've looked at so far, I still think the DeLorean looks pretty futuristic, even though it's supposed to be a shitty car.
Yeah, that's quite an achievement. It has stayed futuristic looking, even though we're now beyond the furthest point in time that the Back to the Future characters go.
So what about Time Cop then? So this might be a bit of a controversial one to throw in Call This Time Machine, but I just remember being struck by how strange it looked. Like you said, it's like the weird vipers from Battlestar Galactica flying into like what we thought was like a wall. And just the CGI that happens on Van Damme's face when he's going through that time travel. It's brilliant. It's sort of like, it looks cheap now, but back in the day, it's weird wobbly face. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I don't know, man. I didn't even think it looked that cheap. I thought it looked all right. I thought the time machine itself was one of the coolest things in Time Cop. And obviously when he does the splits in his kitchen, in his boxes.
The iconic moment from that film.
Okay, so what's your favourite, James, out of this lot?
Oh, this is tricky. I think I'm going to have to be basic and choose the iconic DeLorean. Just because you think of cool time machines, you think of the DeLorean. Like, that's automatically what I would go for.
Yeah, I'm going to just protect myself and not cause any controversy here and agree that the DeLorean is the coolest time machine.
Okay, so well done to the DeLorean for winning coolest time machine.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Our next category today is the most innovative method of time travel. So how these films recreate or create something new and interesting with their time travel. So we have got, as our nominees, The Butterfly Effect, Frequency, Je t'aime, and Minority Report. A real range of interesting time travel methods here.
Yeah, they're all really unique, aren't they? And like none of them are time machines in the traditional sense. Like they've all got something to do more with like memory and things like that in these ones. And I think that was one of the themes which came out when we looked at all these time travel films, was how important memory is to these films, because they have to remember certain points in time in order for them to have like particular relevance to the characters and really propel those storylines in these films.
Yeah, so the most memory of all, I think. Well, debatable, but The Butterfly Effect. What do you think of this? Evan reading his diaries and then just appearing in his own child-aged body.
I mean, I did have some issues with Butterfly Effect when we covered it, but it is an interesting form of time travel. Like, I do like the way it worked in terms of he would write stuff in his journal and then he could go back to those specific moments. And that was it's quite an interesting way of doing it. And then also sort of the way that was the only way he could do it. So when he lost his journals later on, he wasn't able to, like, I quite liked all of that aspect to it.
Yeah, and then later in the film, he's using a home video as well. So the ability that Evan has is more than just the journals. It's more just like any kind of recollection that's vivid enough allows him to vanish into his own history.
It was a good one, yeah, because it did have a lot to it, and it is very memorable because you think of The Butterfly Effect. Like, no matter what you think about the film, it is, if you saw it in the 90s, you remember that film for its time travel, don't you? If it was in the 90s, I can't remember when it came out now. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely memorable. Yeah, it's got some good stuff going. But let's move on to Frequency, a ham radio affected by Aurora Borealis at this time of the year in this part of the country, localized entirely within your ham radio, where the character can communicate with his father who's using it 30 years before, because there was Aurora Borealis then and there's Aurora Borealis now, and it causes some kind of magnesis in the sky and there's a scientist. What do you think of all that, James?
It's great. It's absolutely great. And yeah, and the sort of connection to a Connecticut Yankee that we spotted in that as well, with the sort of like being able to go back in time via like sound waves. And it is a bit sort of more on the fantasy side, this one, but it is innovative. And I think it's very, like, we've seen that in films since. I can't remember what it was, but there was one film that we looked at on the series and we were like, oh, that's like Frequency.
I think we saw it in Days of Future Past, where the idea in Frequency is that when the characters are experiencing the effects of the time travel, there's like a live window open on both sides when no changes will be made to the future. But then when that tunnel or portal or whatever you want to call it closes, the effects of time travel take place on the future and the universe is changed.
What about Je t'aime then? Because we both really enjoyed that film. I remember really loving it. What did you think about, like, how innovative is it as a time travel sort of method?
Yeah, so there is a time machine in this one, but the time machine is just like a big squishy womb or something.
Fleshy beanbags and stuff.
That he's put into, and then I think he's given some drugs, isn't he? I think to like knock him out, and then he's selected because of his vivid memories, and also we learn about his sort of specific ability to have like a keen eye for detail and memory, and that seems to be feeding into his suitability as a candidate, and that allows him to go back into his memories, similar to Butterfly Effect. But in this one there was we were unsure if he was like really there or was he watching it on an imaginary movie screen, like like an observer. That was a little bit unclear because it was a little bit more of a bit arty, I guess. It's a bit more of a experimental film.
Yeah, I think for that film, it's more about how they showed the time travel rather than sort of like it being the method per se, because it's all, like we said, it was all done through the editing in that film. So you go along and you watch it and you kind of piece it together as you go, his entire life. So it's more sort of like the medium it's told through rather than it being like a cool idea of how the time travel works. Because essentially it's like a lot of the films we've seen in terms of how he goes back. Like it's like The Jacket, where he goes into a drawer and then he flashes like forward and that kind of thing. So it's similar to that. There's like an experiment that's happened to him and that's causing the time travel. So I don't know necessarily if it's the method, but I do love that film, and I'm glad it's in the sort of like nominees, because any chance to talk about Shatem is a bonus for me now.
Yeah, it was interesting as well because, like you were saying about the editing was so interesting. It's probably the best example we saw of the kind of language of cinema being used to tell a time travel story and show time travel. And that was pretty cool. But that also kind of happened in the next nominee as well, in Minority Report. A bit less so, but there are references to editing in the way that they use time travel. So in this one, we've got, how's time travel working in that? You've got the precogs who are having visions downloaded into computers display the visions as a mess, and then the law enforcement officers that Tom Cruise works for kind of edit it together with their cool digital gloves, PlayStation Move, Xbox Connect.
That's a brilliant way of describing it. Yeah, they get on their games console and they try and figure out how it all works. But like, again, that is quite iconic, I would say, because it does stick in your head, those images of Tom Cruise messing about on the screen with his gloves. And you do think of that. And it is kind of like, it's like a different kind of time travel, because he's looking forward, but he's not actually traveling in time. He's still traveling along the traditional way that time works.
Yeah, it's just reaching into the future and just nabbing a little bit of information and bringing it into the present and using it. And that's so different from all the other things we've seen, which is why it's in there. So, James, out of these four, Butterfly Effect, Frequency, Shatem, Minority Report, what are you thinking? What's the most innovative method of time travel?
I am drawn to Frequency, I've got to be honest, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff we learn when we were watching Frequency, despite it being all sort of like fantasy-esque, in terms of how they depict the time travel and the method being just, it's his voice which is traveling back in time. I think that's really innovative. So I reckon Frequency for me is the one.
I think I agree. And they make such a good thriller out of that. The tension that's mounting, and you don't know what's going to happen, and there's a lot at stake because the effects of the time travel haven't like taken effect in the future yet. So everything's still up for grabs, and you don't know. The main characters are going to survive, but you don't know how it's going to happen, and there's some real threat there, and it becomes like a really exciting thriller by the end. So I agree, yeah, an innovative use of time travel and very clever.
So congratulations to Frequency for winning the Most Innovative Method of Time Travel Award.
Boy, is that you, or you messing with me?
I ain't messing with you. Look, I'm just trying to figure out...
You're telling me your name is Frank Sullivan, you live in Queens, and you want to know how I called the first game in the 1969 World Series? Yeah, that's exactly what I want to know.
So, what have we got next then? We have Most Competent Time Traveler. Okay, this is gonna be an interesting one because we've come across so many time travelers in this series. So first up, we have Phil from Groundhog Day. Then we have Cage from Edge of Tomorrow. We have Wolverine from X-Men Days of Future Past. And we also have Rufus from Bill and Ted. So there's quite a few in there. And those are all really good films. Those are films which I've like, just thinking back now, I had a good time watching all of those.
Yeah, great films, these, and great characters in all of them as well. So the first two, I mean, this is quite tough already between the first two, because we've got both our time loopers, people stuck in time loops, who have this opportunity, Phil and Cage, to just re-experience the day over and over again. Even if they die, they just pop back at the start and they can do things differently and learn from their mistakes and become more efficient in the different things they're doing. But there's important differences in them, I think, in that I think Cage has more of a mission, doesn't he? And he knows more clearly what he's trying to do, which is, for most of the film, stay alive and get further. And that's what he's trying to do on every iteration. Phil, in Groundhog Day, it's more existential. He doesn't know how to get out of his time loop. He's just building up a knowledge of Punxsutawney and becoming more and more godlike and powerful.
Yeah, I think you can't talk about one of those without the other now, can you? Because they're, like you said, they are essentially, well, they're pretty much the same story in terms of the time loops and how they work, but how they're treated is quite different. Yeah, because Cage becomes like this superhuman soldier by the end of it, pretty much, even though he's got no other powers other than he's just trained consistently and he knows all of the moments that are going to happen in this war that's happening. So yeah, there's all that aspect to him. And then like later on in the film, he has to sort of like prove that he still has all that experience and that it can translate into not using time travel as well. So I think that would be one of the things which go for Cage. Also, like Phil's all of the stuff Phil learns going through that day again and again on Groundhog Day. Oh, I don't know. Those two, they're very close for me.
Very close. But okay, what about Wolverine then? We talked about how mission-oriented Wolverine was and how laser-focused he was and how it compared to his younger self as well, maybe, in those films.
Well, he was the only one who could do the time travel, wasn't he, in that film? Because they quickly figured out that because he's got superhuman healing abilities, he's the only one that can go back into the past. And because he's lived so long, he can sort of like deal with that, because he's kind of like, he's a bit like when we looked at cryogenics and we did an episode on that. You've got characters which are thrown into different time periods and they have to adjust. Logan kind of does that anyway, but he has to sort of move with the times consistently because he's like hundreds and hundreds of years old. He's sort of like having to adapt. So in that way, he's a time traveler as well as just having to go back in time for this particular film.
Yeah, and I think in particular, Hugh Jackman is doing a more mature performance for Wolverine in this film because he has this mission that he has to complete. So he's biologically the most suited to the job, but he also he's written and he plays it as a more serious and focused character than maybe he had been in earlier X-Men films, which makes him a real combination of, I guess, competencies that make him the perfect agent for this time travel mission.
Yeah, and I think he is in that film, isn't he? Because he gets straight into the mission mode straight away. People believe him. They understand he's a time traveler. They can beat through all that exposition really quickly and get to the point of the film. So what about Rufus then in Bill and Ted? Because he's our other nominee in this category. What do you think about that?
So I think Rufus just embodies the man from the future who fully understands time travel. He's the wise teacher character. I think he goes above and beyond what the Doc does in the Back to the Future trilogy, because Doc is, for the most part, less so in the third one, but for the most part, very scatty and all over the place and eccentric, even though he knows his stuff about time travel. Rufus is so calm and cool, and he's got Eddie Van Halen's hands to play guitar. So he's kind of just this perfect like ideal of the man from the future who comes and tells our characters how time travel works and what they need to do.
Yeah, and we sort of like, we were looking at potentially doing an episode about that at one point where we had people from the future coming back and teaching people of the past how they're supposed to be doing things so you get the best possible outcome. But Rufus is sort of like the epitome of that, isn't he? He's teaching these two clueless teenagers how to travel in time and then become sort of like saviors of the world. So it's got all of that stuff to it. And like you said, the Doc Brown comparison is really good, because I think the difference is with Bill and Ted, you hardly see Rufus, but he is like, it's because he's so competent and he knows what he's doing. So yeah, it's good that we've got him in this category, because I think I would have overlooked him if you hadn't have brought him up previously, because you don't see him very much.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes from Bill and Ted's reactions to him. Well, we talked about it when we did the episode, didn't we? That he's a complete stranger and they got no reason to trust him. But future Bill and Ted are with him, so future Bill and Ted vouch for Rufus being, they love him already. So we get into this sort of predestination paradox loop of why those characters like him. And also, we like those characters. They're like very sweet and stupid and very funny and lovable. So we go along with them. If they're vouching for Rufus, then the audience just trusts that Rufus is like, hey, Rufus, great guy. We love him. He's great.
Yeah. And I think you can't really, like, as good as Doc Brown is as a time traveler, you can't really have him in this category because quite a lot of stuff goes wrong for him during his time traveling. So I don't know how competent you could say he is.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch Back to the Future Part 3 and see the development in Doc and see him really become like a self-assured character, less of the eccentric comedy stuff and actually seeing the more mature side to him. But yeah, I think he's more defined by his scatty, harebrained, opening a dog can with a big Rube Goldberg machine, in the first one. That's the Doc that we know and love, and we do love him, but competency, I'm not so sure.
I think also we should have an honourable mention in this category as well for Evan from Butterfly Effect for being the least competent time traveller, because he really does fuck things up with his time travel, doesn't he?
Yeah, it can't seem to go right for Evan to the point where he accidentally causes himself to lose all of his limbs from one of his time travel escapades, which, from what I remember the film, he should have stayed in that time travel moment, but he then continues to go and mess around with time travel against everyone's better instincts, I think.
Yeah, bit of a selfish time traveler Evan was, but yeah, that enough about him. Who do we think is the most competent time traveler then?
Right. Let's think about this, because I think it's between two of them. I actually, to be honest with you, James, I think it's Rufus, but because he is not the hero of the story and he's kind of the tutor, I don't think that he can win it.
Because we don't see his like time travel story, do we?
Yeah, exactly. He's already got the knowledge, and that for me, it's more about the characters in the time loop films who have to gain the knowledge of becoming a competent time traveler over the course of the movie, which makes both of those movies so much fun to watch. But I'm really torn between Groundhog Day and Edge of Tomorrow, Phil and Cage. What are you thinking?
Yeah, this is it. Because do you go the guy who becomes like a super action hero and isn't a coward anymore, or do you go for the selfish guy who becomes like this altruistic, like guy who everybody loves by the end of it? Which one?
I think I've made my mind up, and I'm going to show my working for this, James. I think that it's Phil in Groundhog Day, because in Edge of Tomorrow, Cage becomes a brilliant action hero time traveler because he keeps getting killed, and he is forced into a situation where he has to react and reactively become a super soldier through experience. Phil in Groundhog Day just stumbles into this time loop, and he starts killing himself later, so he does die, but he's not in any immediate threat. He's just experiencing the time loop and then over and over again and feeling his way around the world and learning more and more and becoming like a godlike figure with omnipotent power over this town that he's learned everything about. And I think there's something about the way that he just sort of discovers that on his own without any threat or danger that forces him into a situation that I think makes him a more compelling character to watch and the most competent one for me. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think just like all of the things he teaches himself, like he makes use of that time that he has. He like learns the piano, he learns different languages and reads poetry and stuff. And he really, like, it's all just self-discovery for him. Whereas, yeah, I think I agree with you. Like Cage it does become a competent time traveler by the end, but that's because, yeah, he's been killed loads of times. So it's either that or keep going into this war zone and just being killed on repeat. Live, die, repeat.
Yeah. Yeah, he's forced into it, and it's a very one-note, military-focused, perfect soldier competency that he develops, whereas Phil's is much more rounded and existential, and he has this breadth of experience. Like you mentioned, the piano and stuff, there's so much folding into his character that, Cage is going to come out of Edge of Tomorrow as the perfect soldier, but Phil comes out as this Renaissance man who can just do everything and is no longer a scumbag. And, he is completely changed in every conceivable way by the end of the film. So, yeah, are we agreed, Phil?
Yeah, I think so. I think Phil wins this one.
Nice. So, congratulations to Phil from Groundhog Day, the wonderful Bill Murray, our most competent time traveler in a time travel movie.
I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
Because you survived a car wreck? You folks ready to order?
I didn't just survive a wreck. I wasn't just blown up yesterday. I have been stabbed, shot, poisoned, frozen, hung, electrocuted, and burned.
Oh, really?
And every morning I wake up without a scratch on me, not a dent in the fender. I am an immortal.
All right, this is an interesting one, the next one. We're going to be talking about the best depiction of the time stream or the time warp.
I knew you were going to say that as soon as you did.
So the nominees for this are The Circuits of Time from Bill and Ted, The Flight of the Navigator's crazy light show, lightning and all that, the swirling vortex of the hot tub time machine itself, and The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, the surreal imagery within the time stream or whatever the hell it was in that film.
Oof, yeah, this is a good one. I'm already getting visions of all of those moments when they first travel in time. And sort of like you said, the light shows and stuff that they've got in there. Lots of lightning when you travel back in time.
Yes, that seems to be a common theme. Yeah, I think we talked about this in one of the films we looked at. Something about the elemental force of lightning that's communicated visually, and you kind of feel it in your guts when you see lightning on screen. There's something very primal about it. It feels like the universe is being ripped apart when lightning's happening. So it's a good, quick visual cue for time travel.
Yeah, and that's specifically it's in the Circuit of Time in Bill and Ted a lot, isn't it? They've got lightning everywhere. Is it like they've got wormhole things going on and stuff?
Well, there's circuits. It's all tied into the phone booth itself. It's like you're dialing in a number, which is like the time period that you want to go to, and then you go through the circuit that is connected from 1980 whatever San Dimas to Billy the Kid's time, whenever that was. There's a specific circuit that connects those two times, as there would be, when you're connecting a phone call. I'm picturing operators plugging in the sockets to connect a phone call.
Or like in those films where they've got a letter in the post office and they put them through that
Yeah.
pipe and then they go to the right place. It's all that kind of stuff, isn't it? Which I think is it's a really nice visualization for depicting time travel, showing them go in this time machine and go down this weird pipe, weird sort of whatever it is to get to where they need to go. I think that's really cool.
What about The Flight of the Navigator? You loved the time travel in this, didn't you?
Yeah, it was really sort of it was proper 80s video gamey, wasn't it? It's like the horizons you see in that, and again, all the lightning and things like that. I don't think it is as good as The Circuit of Time, thinking about it now, but I do remember it as being sort of quite a nice visualization in that film.
Yeah, and the thing I liked most about it was that it was very bonk on the head.
Yeah.
Because he falls down into the ravine and then it just kind of happens to him.
Now, Hot Tub Time Machine was a good one as well, wasn't it? Because there were lots of things that you noticed in particular about when they travel in time that I didn't clock when we watched it. Like how they sort of go into weird alternate reality versions of themselves and things.
That was probably the best thing that was going on in Hot Tub Time Machine. I mean, the overall look.
Just for the whole film.
The overall look of the time machine, it's a fun scene. It's like a chaotic montage. They're getting absolutely blackout drunk, and then that's causing some magic because they spilled some kind of, what was it, like a Russian energy drink on the controls of the hot tub. But yeah, it was the alternate realities that just glimpsed. There's like just a couple of frames of like all the characters as women, or they were flipped in terms of 3 black guys and 1 white guy instead of the other way around. Just seeing these, what I thought might be potential alternate timelines that the hot tub was conjuring up and mixing up as it transported them back to the 80s.
Yeah, and it was like, unlike a stream, it was just like a whirlpool, wasn't it? Because it's in the hot tub, and sort of like them going round in circles and like being swept up in this vortex as they travel through time was quite cool as well. Again, like, it's a good visualization of the time stream. And
also, we can't forget The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, where she gets a bonk on the something. Does she land on? She lands on like the walnut.
Yeah, she trips up on the walnut and then hits her head.
But she sees, definitely the first time she sees it, it's like a series of very surreal images. One of them looked like a Van Gogh painting. One of them looked like the inside of a computer chip. And then the one that became like a motif for the film was like a white void with a digital timeline in red. And she could kind of pick out a time and then leap towards it. And that's when she would jump out.
Yeah, I really loved this one. And because it's an animation, they can do so much with how they sort of show this on screen. Like you said, the sort of weird painting things that happen. Like there's loads of horses that go galloping at her. She's like tumbling down. It's kind of got like a Alice in Wonderland kind of vibe to it as well. Like with her falling down the rabbit hole. So it's got all of that stuff to it. And it's just... it looks beautiful. Like that was one of the things which I really liked. And it's like the film is The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. There's so much of her leaping, but her first moment when she travels through time is when she's falling, which I quite liked as well. So it was all that sort of stuff that's thrown in there.
Yeah, and for an animated film as well, it's great to just have a moment where you can just like go absolutely crazy with the animation and just do something really, really visual, kind of like the end of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where the big fight scene at the end of that, where it's just like pure psychedelic animation. You just couldn't do it in a live action movie with all the CGI in the world. It just wouldn't look that good. And allowing animation to just do something purely visual and beautiful, I think is really important in any animated film.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so sort of like, it's different to the ways we've seen it before. There's no sort of like lightning and things like that. It's got like the clock aspect to it. It sort of shows all that kind of thing. But it does seem very different, that depiction.
So which one of these is your favourite depiction, James?
Oh, now I did pretty much just love off The Girl Who Leapt Through Time just then. But if we're talking about best depiction of the time stream and just how it all matches up to the film itself and like the themes and motif of what's going on, I'd probably say Bill and Ted, because just the way you explained it previously with it being like the circuits of time and they're traveling to these different points and it all fits in with this idea of the time machine being a phone box. I think that's probably the one for me.
I agree. I love the circuits of time, but as soon as I read this list and I was thinking about The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, for me, it's got to be that. The pure visuals of that. I've got to disagree with you on this one and go with The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. It's just an incredible set of visuals.
Okay, I can see that. So I guess that one's a tie then between the circuits of time in Bill and Ted's and the crazy animation going on in The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. So yeah, congratulations to both those films.
Yeah, we're going to have to put a call in and get 2 awards made up for that one. It's going to cost us a little bit extra, but we'll talk to our accountants on that and see what we can do. Unless the guys are willing to share the award for that, we'll talk to them. We'll figure something out, don't worry.
Just break it in half and they can have half each.
Oh, nice. Yeah, good idea.
Cheaper. So next up, we have Best Time Travel Exposition. Now, it's always tricky trying to explain time travel, especially when you're trying to explain it to myself, which Matt's had to do numerous times. So the nominees for this category are Primer, Oh my God, Primer, trying to figure out the time travel in that. My head's breaking just thinking about that. We've also got Back to the Future Part 2. We've got 12 Monkeys. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time's back. We've got that one in there as well. And we've got Avengers Endgame as well. So yeah, lots of time travel exposition to go through now.
So starting with Primer, I mean, Primer's famous for being like a complicated film that's hard to understand. And it is. And the best exposition and explanation for Primer is Googling like an infographic on what the hell's going on. But the one thing I think is really powerful and effective in Primer is the scene where Abe takes Aaron to the warehouse where the time machine is stored and shows Aaron the future Abe, or is it the past Abe? I don't even know. I think it's the future Abe, going into the box, going back to the box. So just that scene where it's like there's doubles on screen for the first time, and it's like, look over there and you're going to see another version of me. And you're suddenly like thrust into this like time travel world where two versions of the same person are going to be going around. And then we get into all the stuff where, so I'm going to go and hide in the hotel room, and then we play the stock market, and then we go back and all of this. That all happens afterwards, but I thought that was really powerful just to introduce the concept and just be like, there's me over there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I did like that. And there's sort of like the other exposition in that as well, when Aaron later on is telling Abe, well, Abe's kind of figuring out that Aaron has been going back in time and he's already had a failsafe machine. All that kind of exposition that comes in as well. That was very clever.
It's also kind of, it's also like anime-like, where there's so many like double crosses and reveals, and it's like, no, I actually had a second failsafe device. It's like anime hero and villain just facing off against each other with a constant like one-upmanship, and there's another reveal and there's something else.
Yeah, it's got all of that kind of stuff going for it as well. I mean, it is still very tricky to piece together, but I think we did do a good job of sort of putting that film together when we covered it on the pod. But yeah, I think it's got a lot of exposition in. What about Back to the Future Part 2 then? Because this is what I like. This is simple. It's a chalkboard and Doc Brown going, okay, so this is how parallel timelines work. And he's just doing a simple little thing on the chalkboard, and that I can totally get on board with.
Yeah, straight line, 1985, this is where we're from, and then simple branch off the bottom, alternate 1985. It's the perfect illustration of an alternate timeline that nobody would misunderstand. It's very, very clear for quite a complicated thing that, big blockbuster action adventure sci-fi doesn't have a lot of time to dwell on. It's like we need Marty and we need the audience to understand what's going on with this alternate 1985 and why we've got to go back to 1955, which we already did in the last film, to sort this whole thing out and get rid of Donald Trump Biff.
And I feel like the infographics that you're talking about with Primer, they are all sort of like in part taken from Back to the Future Part 2. Because the way they show it on that chalkboard is how I've seen a lot of infographics for that.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of time travel cinema since the 80s has been heavily drawing from the Back to the Future trilogy for good reason.
So what about the next one we've got down here? 12 Monkeys. So you've got Bruce Willis he has to explain to all of these people in this psychiatric ward that he's a time traveler from the future, and there's going to be a big sort of like virus that's going to wipe out most of mankind. And he's trying to sort of like say, okay, so I need to bring back information to the future. So he's having to try and explain that again and again. So that exposition doesn't always go down well with the people he's trying to tell it to. And he's more trying to convince people the whole time, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like a narrator explaining things. He's a man from the future with all the knowledge explaining things, but just treated like a crazy person who is put into a hospital for that. So he's got all this exposition power in the film, but he is crazy and he is mentally unstable. That's a fact. He's having difficulty in the future as well. So he didn't make it into our most competent time travelers nominations. So what about The Girl Who Leapt Through Time? The thing I love about this, and the reason it had to go into this category, was that her aunt just says, oh, it looks like you've leapt through time. A lot of girls your age do that.
I mean, that's brilliant time travel exposition right there. not really explaining anything at all, just saying, oh yeah, it just happens, you know.
Yeah, we get full exposition towards the end of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. We've got another person from the future who knows what's going on, and then they take a little time freeze moment to just, you know, have a big explanation of all the time travel. The walnut is a time machine of some sort, and I've come from the future, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I just love the way the aunt is depicted in that, because the first, you know, when I watched it, I just took it at face value. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's what's caused it.
It's just something that happens to girls. Just have that moment when you're starting to leap through time. I mean, sure, why not?
Okay, so Avengers Endgame, the one that we watched very recently, just chock-a-block with explanation of what's going on, mostly from Smart Hulk, who's just saying that they're gonna go back through time. They're gonna get time stones. There's two really great scenes of exposition for the time travel in this. It's where they're arguing about how it's going to work and listing off all the time travel movies. And then later when Bruce is having the conversation about plucking things from the time stream and returning them. But both of them really cool exposition.
Yeah, and they sort of like, they weave in all of these previous expositions from different time travel films, and the way they reference all of those different ways of setting up time travel is quite good. I mean, they do like 100 references to Back to the Future in that, don't they?
Yeah. Well, like I said, like a lot of time travel films, stealing or referencing Back to the Future later on because it's so good.
And we've got an honourable mention in here as well, haven't we, Matt?
Yeah, it's the straws.
I wanted to set you up for that because I know how much you enjoyed the bit with the straws in Looper and the time travel exposition there, or lack of exposition rather.
I have to say I was glad that Looper still didn't make sense, and me being annoyed at it all those years ago when I first saw it still felt justified because it just doesn't make sense. The exposition is not good enough in that film.
What does Bruce Willis say in that? He says...
I think he just says, I don't want to talk about it or something like that, doesn't he?
I don't want to talk about time travel shit. I think those...
Well, you're in the wrong film, Bruce.
Get out of here, Bruce.
I don't want to talk about time travel shit. Because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws.
Okay, so what is your favourite time travel exposition, James?
I think... personally, just due to how much it's influenced everything else and how they explain time travel, it's got to be Back to the Future Part 2. I mean, Back to the Future in general, the way they explain what's happening in their time travel is just, it's simple. Kids can understand it. I can understand it. And you can throw it into a different film and it all makes sense.
Yeah, I'm agreed 100%. It's nice and simple. We've got a nice, clear drawing that has like 3 lines but communicates so much on Doc Brown's blackboard and just drives the rest of the plot of the movie. Just a simple drawing on a blackboard. Brilliant stuff.
Great stuff. So that means our winner for Best Time Travel Exposition is, of course, the legendary Back to the Future Part 2.
Imagine that this line represents time. There's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
The next category is the most awkward time travel moment. We've seen quite a few of these where things get weird for time travelers. And the first nominee is the first one I think that we saw. It's Back to the Future. Marty and his mother, Lorraine, in his mother's bedroom, and other points in that film. But mainly that first scene when they're in the bedroom together, when he wakes up after getting hit by a car. Second nominee is the time traveler's wife, when he steps out of the bush naked in front of a little girl. Oh dear. So I don't feel good about this category. Next is Time Crimes, when he stumbles upon the naked girl. More nudity. The naked girl in the woods, propped up against a rock. And finally, Groundhog Day, where Phil sleeps with the girl by learning everything he needs to learn about her to convince her that she should sleep with him. Gross stuff, James. What do you think about these?
It's all a bit suspect, this category, isn't it? All of these nominees in here are a little bit shady. So let's start with Back to the Future then. So Marty and Lorraine in the bedroom. A lot of people, like I know, have real issues with this in the film, and I think it was very controversial when it came out, wasn't it? That he would end up sort of like potentially getting with his mum. It's a bit Oedipus complex, isn't it?
Yeah, bit of an Oedipus complex and a little bit controversial. It's just really weird, and I'd forgotten how much it drives the plot of that first film that she just wants to get with him.
Yeah,
I think we did talk about
very randy.
We did talk about at the time that there's like a saving grace right at the end when they kiss, and she's just like, ugh, gross. I don't understand why, but it's gross. But she's right. It is gross. The whole damn thing's gross.
It's interesting, that paternal instinct thing you were talking about, though, because like that does sort of translate, and then she sort of knows like, oh no, this shouldn't happen. And we covered that again. We looked at Doctor Who, and we looked at the Father's Day episode, and there's a moment in that where Rose meets her dad, and she's very clear straight off the bat, like, no, we're not going to have any sort of like relationship like that. It can't happen. So it's like, it's got that, because it's such an awkward moment in a time travel film, you've seen it resonate and sort of carry on into other sort of time travel shows and films and stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of become a gross, iconic thing for all the wrong reasons. Yeah. Okay, what about the time traveler's wife? So let's just run this over again. He appears in the past. He's drawn to moments, significant moments. He's drawn to his wife, which means that he goes and appears to his wife as a young girl. And just as a little cherry on the top of the cake, he just happens to be nude every time he time travels. So he's a fully grown man appearing out of a bush, fully nude, in front of a young girl that he is in love with.
I mean, just you explaining that is like even awkward as it is. But I mean, what a film. Yeah, and like the first thing that she says as well is he says, don't tell your mum. Don't tell your mum. Don't tell your mum that I'm here naked in the bush, and I'm a time traveler. It's like, yeah, don't believe any naked men that you see in bushes saying they're time travelers.
This is basic parenting, yeah. Talking to strangers, naked men. This is absolute fundamentals, guys. You've got to tell your kids not to talk to strangers and naked men that come out of bushes.
Even if they are time travelers, I mean, you just got to be careful about these things. So moving swiftly on, more nakedness, time crimes. The moment when the lead character stumbles upon a naked woman and then goes back and sees the naked woman again, and then, yeah, all sorts of weird stuff happens there.
Yeah, Hector kind of bumbling and then stumbling into competence later in the film, but he has this weird Louis Binwell surreal moment of finding this naked woman, but then on his time loops he ends up causing that scenario when, I don't know, it kind of feels like he doesn't have to. He's got an opportunity to not force this woman to strip off and then knock her out and leave her in the woods. Very strange psychosexual stuff going on with Hector in that film, isn't there?
Yeah, lots of awkward stuff there. And then Groundhog Day, with the moment when Phil just decides he's going to find everything he can out about this one girl, sleep with her, and then just forget about her for the rest of the film, pretty much.
Yeah, genuinely unpleasant thing that Phil does in such a likable movie, and he becomes such a likable character. It's a horribly manipulative, duplicitous thing that he does, which is he uses these newly found godlike powers to trick someone. And that's a big thing that we've seen in time travel films. It's like deception, using your time travel knowledge for deception is clearly always depicted as wrong for good reason.
Yeah, it's not nice, is it? It's very like, it's icky. A lot of these moments are icky. But which is the most awkward then? Because I know which one I'm voting for straight away.
I think we know where we're going with
I don't think it's not even up for debate. I mean, as much as like things like the Marty and Lorraine thing in Back to the Future has gone into other things, you've got the whole sort of like grandfather paradox thing and stuff like that kind of comes into play later on.
The thing about Marty and Lorraine, like, as gross as it is, no one's in the wrong there. Marty doesn't encourage it and doesn't go along with it and doesn't want any part of it. And Lorraine has no way of knowing that she's going to have a son that travels through time. She doesn't know what's going on. Someone who does know what's going on. Someone who does know what's going on is Henry from The Time Traveler's Wife, who has had a problem with time travel his entire life and goes and chats up a young girl. There's no getting around it, James. It's gross. It's weird.
Yeah, and he ends up marrying that girl and causing that girl to have feelings for him, like indirectly. It's all just weird, messed up time travel. So yeah, I think that has to be the winner, doesn't it?
Huge congratulations to The Time Traveler's Wife for being the absolute most awkward moment in a time travel film.
What do you need the blanket for?
I'm a time traveler. I come from the future. And when I do, I don't get to bring my clothes.
There's no such thing as time travelers.
Yes, there is. In fact, you and I are friends in the future. When you're a lady.
Am I pretty?
Yes. Very.
Okay, next award that we'll be dishing out is the Best and Worst Paradox. So the nominees we have for Best and Worst Paradox are Time Cop. Don't touch your past self. It's bad. Bad things will happen. Predestination. So this one, we're going to get into that, but should we go in with the spoiler for that one?
We'll just give a quick spoiler warning. I mean, we gave spoiler warnings when we did this episode, but you might not listen to that episode. Predestination, incredible film. If you haven't seen it, please do watch it and don't listen to this because it will spoil it.
But if you have seen Predestination, you followed the series, hopefully you've come to this episode knowing all the stuff. Predestination, the best and worst paradox, sleeping with and then giving birth to yourself. Absolutely mad. Next nominee, we have Looper, confusing rules of time travel that Bruce Willis absolutely hates. And finally, we have Bill and Ted, getting the things you need after you need them and giving them to yourself before you need them. We'll get into that one and how that works. So first off then, Time Cop and touching your past self. Is this best and worst paradox?
So, I mean, this category, this is the stuff that we've been trying to wrap our heads around all series, isn't it? This is the confusing stuff. But I think Time Cop is the only paradox that's not a predestination paradox. Is that right? The devastating effects of time travel in Time Cop that we started referring to as Time Cop rules is if you come into physical contact with yourself, the same matter cannot occupy the same space. Is that how they phrase it in that film? And you just sort of like morph into this big gross blob. It's CGI, but it also kind of looks like a David Cronenberg monster, and then you die.
Yeah, and like you said, every time we've talked about that, it's been Time Cop rules, and I think that is it's a good paradox, isn't it? It's one which is memorable and one which we've seen used time and time again.
Yeah. So predestination, sleeping with and then giving birth to yourself. Wow. What a concept.
I mean, this was brilliant. I mean, that is essentially the whole point of the film, what happens there. But it's just on a continuous loop as well. And the more you think about it, the more sort of it messes with your mind, just with how complex the time traveling is in that film, but how it's it's a closed loop, isn't it?
Yeah, the unmarried mother, John/Jane, Sarah Snook, also Ethan Hawke, the perfect closed loop, the perfect time traveler, becomes the older version of the character, then steals themselves as a baby, and in the middle of all that is having sex with themselves and giving birth to themselves. Incredible stuff. So Looper, those confusing rules that just don't make sense. They come back in time, they kill themselves. It's a different timeline, but also you can carve something into the younger self's skin and it shows up on the older self, which doesn't make any sense because if it was an alternate timeline, that shouldn't be happening. What's going on there?
Yeah, and if you're changing your future and you're having all these different experiences, is it going to not change your future self as per the end of the film? It's very messy, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about time travel shit, James.
Okay. let's move away from Looper then. Bill and Ted, much better. There we go. This will calm me down. Bill and Ted, getting the things you need after you need them and giving them to yourself before you need them. Brilliant. So good.
And this is reused in other things. We saw it again in Doctor Who when he's going to solve the problems of the episode Blink by just getting the information he needs to sort this problem out as he's living it. So what's going on in that in Bill and Ted? They have to get like a dictaphone so they can distract people. They don't have a dictaphone. They haven't recorded any audio on a dictaphone, but if everything goes okay for them, they can just go and grab one later, record some audio, leave it in the police station with their time machine, and hey presto, we've created a distraction.
Exactly. It's again, it's another clever, weird paradox situation. And I remember when I first watched that film, I hadn't clocked how clever it is and how sort of like how well put together it is. Like the moment where the bin flies down, and it's because they've decided that they'll put the bin there at that point. It's just, it all matches up really well. And it's like a nice, tight way of explaining away what's happening in the film.
Yeah, and it introduces this idea that a time machine gives you some sense of just infinite power in what you can do, because you can then just get out of any situation by saying, oh, later on, I'm going to give myself the exact thing I need to get out of this situation. That's infinite power. There's nothing you can't do with that kind of power. So what's your favourite out of these paradoxes that are simultaneously the best and worst paradox?
Oh, mate, this is difficult, this one, because there's some really good ones in here. I'm not going to say Looper, because I'm just not. Because Time Cop's a really good one. It's one which has like stuck with us throughout the series. But then Predestination, that entire paradox is absolutely brilliant. And also like Bill and Ted, I just don't know, Matt.
For me, I mean, I think it's really close between Predestination and Bill and Ted, because that's such a fun idea in Bill and Ted, and it's been used again and again, and it's really cool. I think for me, though, it's got to be Predestination, because Predestination is a paradox movie, and it just takes the idea of a predestination paradox and makes an entire story out of it.
Yeah, I think you're right, because just how powerful that is, and that those sort of like revelations that you get when you watch that film, I think that has to edge it for me, because it's just, again, it's really well put together, and all of these weird things that are happening when you watch it, you never think they would end up the way they do at the end.
Yeah, so congratulations to Predestination, the best and worst paradox in cinema.
You're not how I imagined you'd look. Do I know you? You're beautiful.
Our penultimate category is the best hidden gem. So we wanted to talk about some of the films that we watched this series that neither of us had seen before, or perhaps even never heard of before, and which of those was our favourite time travel new recommendation. So the first one is the French movie Je t'aime, je t'aime. Then we've got Predestination. We've got Slaughterhouse-Five and Time Crimes.
There's some good ones in there. Now, I loved all of these, and like you said, it's the first time I'd watched these four films. I remember Je t'aime just being so much in my head after I watched it, and I think it still is now. So I think that's really up there for me. What about you?
Well, I think we can definitely have two winners for this one, because all of these films were such a treat to discover for the first time. Slaughterhouse-Five is the only one I'd even heard of, because it's based on a Kurt Vonnegut novel. I was aware of it, but I hadn't seen it, but really, really liked it. There's so much like emotion, and the anti-war message of it is so powerful.
And you watched that one twice, didn't you? You watched it back to back.
Yeah, I rewatched it the next day. I can't even remember why. I think I just liked it a lot, and I wanted to. And it was, I don't know, there was some confusing stuff in there because of the way the narrative jumps about. I just wanted to get it all straight in my head before we recorded. But then we've got, Predestination and Time Crimes, more recent kind of more indie sci-fi, which is something that we both love. Predestination, you could call Predestination indie, couldn't you?
Yeah, I would definitely call it indie. And with Predestination as well, it was something which I'd heard people talk about it and how good it was, but I kind of wasn't expecting it. Like, even though I'd heard about the hype, I just didn't know what it was about, really. So I had very little knowledge going in. And I think that's the best way to watch that film. If you go in, you just watch it and go along for the ride. And yeah, you what a ride that is.
And of course, Time Crimes, a Spanish time travel movie. I just don't think I would have had the opportunity to have heard about this film if we weren't doing this podcast. You know, we researched stuff. You found that one and you put it on the list. I think it's known within sci-fi fans, but it's not well known. And it's such a great little tight, complex, clever little sci-fi film that is the exact thing that we love on this podcast and we always want to see. So that was a real treat as well. I mean, what was your favourite out of these?
For me, I am torn between Je t'aime and Predestination. And if I think about what I would recommend more to people, knowing like Je t'aime is like, it's brilliant and I love it, but I think there's an audience for it and an audience which will just be like, I'm not getting anything from this film.
Right.
Just because it's a little bit sort of art cinema to a degree. Whereas I think I could show Predestination to anyone and they'll be like, what the fuck by the end of it. So for me, I think in terms of new recommendations, I'd recommend all of these. They're brilliant, but Predestination has the biggest impact for me.
Yeah, me too. I'm so happy that we got to see Predestination. I think I talked about it when we did the episode, that I was aware of the basic plot of the story it's based on, but I was just so glad that I didn't realize that was what it was when it was happening. It's just exactly what a sci-fi film experience should be, which is going in knowing nothing about it, which is what I don't know what your experience was, but it's what I got out of it. And the perfect film to have that kind of experience with. I can't think of the last time I had that experience was when I went to see Ex Machina at the cinema with Mike, and I only went because Mike said, come and see this, and I didn't know anything about it. And seeing that kind of a film, these films aren't similar, but that experience of just not knowing anything about it, putting it on and watching a really, really bloody good sci-fi film with no expectations. Perfect for me.
So I think that settles it. The best hidden gem from this series of the podcast is Predestination. So congratulations, Predestination. You can come and get your award. Everyone who's worked on it, come up to the stand now. We'll give it to you. You can take it away. You don't have to halve this one. But if you do take it away, you have to make sure you watch the other films we've mentioned. Thanks. Bye.
One thing this job has taught me is that truth is stranger than fiction. I've heard something incredible. Nothing astonishes me anymore.
You don't know what incredible means.
Yeah, well, try me.
So we come to the last category, which is best time travel film. Now, we split this off into best hidden gem and best time travel film because we just covered so many great films on this series. We felt like it would be wrong not to mention some of those ones which we discovered along our journey through sci-fi this series. So, without further ado, best time travel film. The nominees are Back to the Future, Primer, 12 Monkeys, Avengers Endgame, and Planet of the Apes.
Ooh. God, this is tough, James.
Ooh.
We've got some really iconic films here. Back to the Future, I mean, that's everybody's favorite time travel film, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's people's go-to, isn't it? Like, you can't get around how much of an influence Back to the Future, the whole Back to the Future trilogy has had on any sort of time travel film.
Well, I'd go even beyond that. I think there's the influence it's had on Hollywood since it came out. It's so much more than just a time travel movie, isn't it? The very fact that it's after Star Wars, it's the biggest trilogy of all time. It's a blockbuster blueprint for like family adventure films. Like, it does so much for cinema, I think.
Definitely. It's had such an impact. So a film which has still had an impact, but I think is a lot lesser known, but one which we were very happy to talk about on the podcast, Primer. So why do you think Primer could potentially win best time travel film?
I feel like Primer might be whereas Back to the Future might be one of the blueprints for Hollywood blockbusters, Primer is like a blueprint for a perfect indie sci-fi film. You know, it's what we love about this podcast. It could have been our best hidden gem, but we'd both seen it before and we were both well aware of it. And the reason we're both well aware of it is because it became such a huge hit for sci-fi fans. It's simple but complex. It's low budget. It's short. And it's just got so much going on. It's just like really tight performances, and Shane Carruth does so many roles on it.
And it's such a high concept, isn't it? Like we always talk about high concept, low budget, but this one, it's very ambitious in what it's doing, but it's tight, and you go along for that journey in Prime. You try and piece together all of the weird time travel stuff that's going on, but you come out of it and you're kind of like, yeah, I quite want to watch that again and try and figure it out.
Yeah, and it rewards those multiple viewings.
Definitely. So what about 12 Monkeys then? Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, which was requested by a lot of people for this series as well. A lot of people are going, when are you going to cover 12 Monkeys? Want to hear about that? Because it is like, it's well known. It's like spawned a TV show since. It was like everybody was talking about it when it came out. It's one of those time travel films that has had an impact again and people know about.
Yeah, and it's got Terry Gilliam, who is just such an incredible director, who brings such an incredible vision to the screen with a brilliant cast of collaborators. And we watched that documentary, didn't we, as well, when we did the podcast, and we got to see all of the people that come in, the set designers who bring Terry Gilliam's vision to life. I don't know. I don't know if it's better than Brazil. I'd be very torn there, but it's one of Terry Gilliam's best films. He's a legendary filmmaker. Bruce Willis is on such great form. Brad Pitt's on such great form. There's so much going on, and you know, I love short films, and I think we talked about this when we did it. This is a really long film, and I just was so into it, start to finish. It's gripping every moment of it.
And it took that story from La Jetée and it kind of like added to it and built upon all of the interesting things that you see in that short film. So it was, it's a really interesting case, that one.
Yeah, tough to classify it as a remake, but if you call it a remake, it's got to be the best remake of all time, right?
Oh, that's big. That's big, bold words there, Matt.
Yeah, I've had a couple of beers while we're recording, so if that's wrong, if people are like, that's a stupid thing to say.
People have just been like, how outrageous.
Yeah, he forgot about that movie we all love. Okay, what about, speaking of long films that I loved every minute of, Avengers Endgame. What a lot of fun this was to watch back.
Yeah, this was great. And I loved sort of like talking about that one and how it uses the fictional universe it's created and builds upon all that sort of like audience investment. And it made so much money. I mean, love or hate Marvel, this is like the biggest time travel film to come out, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the box office, this is the epitome of Hollywood cinema. This is what Hollywood is trying to achieve. And that is several $1 billion.
Yeah, give us your money. We just want your money, basically.
But also just so rewarding for the audience to be at the end of a 10-year cinematic universe. Well, not the end, as we talked about, but an end to a cinematic universe, and just go back through it and relive those moments like a clip show, but a really, really good clip show.
Yeah, like the best of episode you've ever seen that actually has a narrative for it as well.
And how could we forget your favorite movie of all time, Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, I had to get this in somewhere. It didn't feel right in any of the other categories. And like the time travel in this is always sort of like, it's a different one to what you see in a lot of time travel films, but they go into the future. They are on a planet which they don't even know like where they are. They sort of figure all that out along the way. And like the end bit of Planet of the Apes is iconic. It's one of the most iconic things in cinema. But I think also with this film, there's so much more than just the time travel aspects in it. Like we said when we talked about it, it's about sort of like the the topics of racism and the politics angle and all of that stuff that's thrown into the original Planet of the Apes. I think that's why it's an important film in general. I think maybe it's not the best time travel film, because when we're looking at time travel films, we're looking at sort of like going to different time periods and all that kind of stuff, and then that being the main focus of the film. So I don't know, how do you feel about this one?
Yeah, so good to watch this film again and see so much more to it than just the iconic ending, which is absolutely brilliant, but seeing that there's so much more to it and enjoying all of that stuff was really, really enjoyable. You say it's not like the best time travel film, even though it's, you know, incredible sci-fi. What's so interesting about that is, and the way it didn't fit into any of the other categories, something that we've seen a lot of this series is that traveling into the future is far, far less a popular trope than traveling into the past. Most of the films that we've looked at deal with characters who go back, whether they go back 100 years or 10 minutes and just live things again. That really seems to be what time travel cinema is about. It's about looking back and going back and re-experiencing things. I mean, Planet of the Apes is definitely the best future time travel film, going into the future. Better even than Back to the Future Part 2, right? It's incredible the way that it uses that long distance traveling into the future to tell a societal, satirical story. It's perfect in that regard, but it's not the most popular type of time travel.
Yeah, because I think also with the time travel films we've looked at, it's so much about different characters' personal journeys. And although Charlton Heston is going on a bit of a personal journey in this, it's more about the people which are, well, the apes that are in the society and sort of like how they view him and how they view humanity in general. So I think that's more of a theme in that particular film. Whereas all of these, like, to be a time travel film, what we found is it's about those personal, like, it's people's personal history primarily. And all the other films in there are kind of like looking at that in different ways. Whereas Planet of the Apes kind of like has a much broader sci-fi framework to it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All of that in mind, James. What's the best time travel film?
I think it's got to be Back to the Future. I mean, I don't feel like these other films would exist if Back to the Future hadn't been made.
Well, Planet of the Apes would.
Well, Planet of the Apes. But I mean, Endgame is just Back to the Future references.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know. I feel like I bowed down to public pressure on the coolest time machine and gave it back to the Future. My head's saying Primer, but my heart's saying Endgame, you know?
Okay. That's interesting.
Opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Primer's got everything I love about sci-fi. It's, like you said, high concept, low budget, really clever, very short. Endgame is blockbuster cinema gone insane to the max and is like 3 hours long, which normally I hate. But I couldn't deny just how much I loved watching it again, and I thought I wouldn't even love it as much as when I saw it at the cinema, but I really, really did, and it really affected me, and it was perfect blockbuster cinema. Even as I'm saying this now, I feel like I have to give it to Endgame.
And like, I think just the impact that throwing time travel into the Marvel Universe has had and will have on future series and shows is going to be more and more prominent now, because I've already read stuff like the new Ant-Man film is going to have more time travel stuff in. There's a character called Kang who's going to kind of come into it, and like this time agency. So I think they've really spawned all this other time travel sort of like serialization that's going to happen as a result of Endgame. So I think it has all of that going for it as well.
That sounds cool. I'm really looking forward to reading the plot summary of the new Ant-Man film on Wikipedia and then not watching it.
I'll fill you in. It's fine. I'll do a singular podcast episode on that.
Thanks, mate. If you could catch me up before the next Avengers film comes out so I understand what's going on, that'd be great.
I've got your back. Don't worry.
So are we calling this a tie then? You'll give it to Back to the Future and I'm going to give it to Avengers Endgame, yeah?
I think both of these films are definitely winners in my eyes. And I think...
they're all winners, James.
Hey, there we go. Congratulations, Back to the Future and Endgame. And congratulations to all of the films we watched, because, like I said before, we've had quite a journey on this series.
You've got to come back with me. Where? Back to the future.
You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
Yeah, this has been a really fun series to do. Thank you all so much for listening to it. It's been great to experience these films with you and chat to you on Twitter and Facebook and email. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing. And we will be back for a new series before you know it. We're taking a little bit of a break whilst we sort of like plan things out for what we're going to be looking at next time round. We're not 100% sure on which subgenre we're going to cover yet, but we have plenty in mind. So yeah, definitely look out for that in the new year, which it is now.
And keep an eye on your podcast feed as well. We're going to be dropping in a couple of bonus episodes while we're on our little podcast holiday, so keep an eye out for them. There'll be some nice little treats while you wait for Series 4 of Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Definitely. And as ever, if you want to get in contact with us, you can find us on social media. When you're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere on the internet, you can find us. Just tap in @Through Sci-Fi or @Through Sci-Fi Pod, and you'll be able to track us down and have a chat. We've also got a lovely Facebook discussion group. You can join in on that. Go on the Facebook page, track that down, and you can chat to us and other listeners of the podcast.
We really appreciate your reviews as well. It really helps the podcast, whether you're reviewing on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use. So drop us a review if you can. Let us know what your favourite film we covered this series was. We'd be very interested to hear from you.
That's it from us for this series. We'll see you again before you know it for more Journey Through Sci-Fi.